Hello and welcome to another Stellarian Games video. In this episode, we're going to be looking at how to make a sand ship. I wanted to make a ship that would be capable of traveling over the surface of the desert and using these runners that are kind of magically plated to reduce friction and make the act of sailing actually possible. Over the surface of the land. The back of the ship is equipped with these little, I guess, trowels or diggers, and as the ship is sailing, they can lower the diggers into the sand and pull on one side or the other, causing the ship to steer. Obviously, this requires the ship to be moving in order to steer, so it's a little awkward, but in a fantasy world, it does work in that setting. It's also equipped with some of these small crossbows. These small little crossbows are meant to be, or ballistas, whatever you want to call them, are meant to be some sort of magically enhanced ballista with magical armaments rather than simply mundane items. So that gives the ship a little bit more power as it's sailing through the sand and battling some odd sand creatures. So in this video, we're going to show you how to make this item. And in some upcoming videos, I'm going to show you how to make some variations on this sand ship. So let's go to the table and see how it's done.
Okay, to start this project, we're going to start by tracing the pontoon sections of the ship onto some cardstock. Just cutting out that rough shape. This will be so that I can get an approximate shape for two different pontoons about the same size. I'm tracing that cardstock shape onto some XPS foam and then decided to try to leave it mostly intact on the edge of the foam so that I could cut the angle sections a little bit easier. So I started at one end of the foam and kind of beveled in the entire length of that pontoon, and then did the same thing on the other side. This created a nice curved structure with an angled bottom. I wanted this to still look somewhat ship-like, like it could work in the water, but really angular, trying to minimize the drag on the ground. I'm drawing in some boards on the side of the pontoons with pencil, also on the top section, adding in some cross hatching so to show that it's kind of constructed of lumber, and then using a fine wire brush and carving in some wood texture to that as well. Then I'm cutting off a little bit of the backside. This will be the notch out where those ground anchors will be positioned later. I'm using some of that same cardstock and making some small rectangles, and then starting on the back side of the pontoon, working my way forward, I'm just overlapping those those sections that are folded in half. This is going to be the ground edge of that metal pontoon section. As I get to the front where it starts to curve a little bit more, I make those cardboard sections a little bit thinner so that they'll adapt to that curve a little bit better. And then finally, I'm using kind of a narrow strip and forming that front wing edge to that pontoon. I'm using some thin dowels and gluing those into place, and using some more of that cardstock to form some brackets that will look like it's holding it in place on the pontoons. The overall structure of this is based on a catamaran structure of a sailing ship. So I decided to use screen to fill in that catamaran middle section, and that screen will be painted up later to make it look like it's a kind of a fishnet appearance. Just cutting out some notches where I know the steering column will be, as well as the main sail. Now I have some wax paper or parchment paper and using hot glue to glue on some string sections to form some detail to that netting surface. So that it's not just one big netting surface. It looks like it's been kind of sewed together with rope reinforcement. Gluing up and over, gluing across, just trying to give it a lot of detail for that bed of the ship. These ships aren't overly large, so this netting detail adds quite a bit of texture and interest to the overall piece. And because it's a wire screen, it'll actually hold the figures up pretty well, and be kind of an interesting effect when it's done. I'm starting to work on the main sail of the ship, just hot gluing 2 dowels together, and then using some finer string with white glue and kind of wrapping it around, forming kind of actually a structural bond holding those 2 pieces together. The hot glue itself is, I guess, temporarily holding it, but the glue with that string really will add the physical structure. Now we have a section of paper towel, and I'm tracing out the shape of the sail onto that paper towel, including some little notch out sections that will act as the attachment points to the sail mast and to the lower boom as well. Just using some white glue to attach those in place, wrapping those attachment points to the mast and the boom. Once that's pretty well secured and dried, then I came along and used some watered down glue to start adding a little bit more structure to that sail. I didn't want to just leave it as the cloth. I wanted a little bit more rigidity to it. So this watered down white glue will work really well to kind of soak into the sail and then eventually harden and give it a little bit more strength. Now back to the ship. I'm drilling in a small hole through the section of the ship. This will be where we attach the mast to the ship itself. I wanted a small nail to act as some structural reinforcement to the sail, not just having the wood on wood connection. I also created a small section in the back for that the nail in the back as well. That'll be where we attach the rudder later on. Using the string and glue method to also give it a little bit of strength. And now I'm coming along and adding that rudder pole as well. I'm adding in some small pins into those brackets to give it a kind of a nailed in or bolted on appearance to those brackets. Adding in some wooden details to the back of the ship where the steering chain will run around the backside and down to the ground anchors. Now I'm just using that string again and attaching it up to the top of the sail. Later on, I'm going to end up painting it, and that string ends up sagging a little bit with that paint. So in retrospect, I don't know if I would add the string again, but it worked for this model. Now I'm using the black paint and Mod Podge approach to sealing the whole piece. And this is where I went over the string as well, and it ended up drooping just a little bit with this Mod Podge and paint. Then I'm going to coat all of the pontoons with a nice dark brown. And I'm also doing the mesh surface deck with that dark brown. And then I'm coming along with a kind of a golden brown, and just doing a pretty liberal dry brush, just so that it picks out a lot of that wood detail and gives it kind of the tone of the ship. For the netting, I then came over with more of like a khaki tan to make it look more like a cloth netting or a string netting. And I'm hitting the ropes with that same khaki as well. Then with that khaki tan, I'm doing a dry brush over the sail. This will give it kind of a nice canvas look. The texture of the paper towel ended up coming through in the end, but I didn't mind too much with this project. I'm just gluing on the mesh netting to the actual cross beams for the catamaran. Then I'm going to use a bronze color to paint the lower metallic plating. I wanted this bronze color to give it sort of a heated metal look, and then I'm going to dry brush on kind of a steel color on the bottom, so that bottom steel color will be where, you know, it rubs more vigorously along the sand, and it's going to look worn and braided along the bottom, and the bronze will make it look like it's sort of heated over time and kind of distorted that way. Now I'm going to start working on those ground anchors. This is just some card stock as well, and just forming some rough shapes, spray painting those black, and then painted them up with some steel gunmetal look. I'm going to start working on the chain section that's going to go down to those ground anchors. This is just a length of necklace chain that I'm stringing through the whole piece, and I'm using a small wire to attach it to that rudder, and then I'll wrap just a small piece of paper around that, glue it into place, and that will be how it attaches to that rudder segment. So as the rudder moves from one side to the other, it will lower one side and raise the other. That's the theory of this anyways. They'd also be able to lift straight up on the rudder to pull them up, or drop it down to drop them both down. I'm using a small pin again to attach those ground anchors into place and give them sort of a pivot point on the piece itself. And then using just a little white glue and gluing it onto the ground anchor for the chain. I'm starting on those ballistas that will go on the sides of the piece. I'm using some scrap plastic pieces from some sprues from some other project, and then using just matchsticks and toothpicks, things like that, to make the structure of the ballista. The front metallic piece to the ballista is just a piece of cardstock as well. I have some small tiny nuts that I'm going to attach to the backside. Those are going to be kind of the winching mechanism for these ballistas. Spray painted those up black, and then giving those a nice painting of brown and metallics to give it the final look. And here's the final piece. Again, this is designed for kind of a desert environment, so that's why it's displayed kind of on the desert UDT. This was really a fun project to make a ship that wasn't really a ship and had to follow different physical elements in creating still a magical item, but really a different approach to a sailing ship. So I really enjoyed this project. I hope you did as well. And if you did, please hit the like button and subscribe, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you.